Today's guest is a 5-time founder who started in COBOL, went on to solve computational fluid dynamics problems, and now runs a fintech company that just went head-to-head with a $5 billion exit and won.
We went up against Brex and a bunch of different clients, and we beat them based upon our technology. Now, fast forward a couple years later, and Brex just recently sold to Capital One for $5 billion. They just sold their tech for $5 billion, and I know I can beat it.
He looks at a business the way an engineer looks at a watch. Every department is a moving part, and none of them work alone.
You might have a marketing arm, you might have a sales arm, you might have a bunch of different components to that business, and all of those components have interworkings to them. And they all work together to achieve a common goal.
3 months after launching his fintech, he'd brought in so much business his own bank couldn't keep up. And nobody warned him what that meant.
We early on had a sponsor bank that we outgrew pretty rapidly. Within 3 months, we outgrew this old sponsor bank. And when we did that, nobody tells you you've outgrown your relationship with that bank.
Rob, welcome to Lead to Scale. Welcome to our show, Lead to Scale. This podcast is sponsored by Algo AI Partners. We help fintech services businesses scale using smart AI solutions. If you want to book a free consultation to find out more, click the link in the description of the show. Today, we're joined by a veteran of the scale-up journey who looks at the world a little differently. Rob, thank you for joining us. Rob's a 5-time founder who started in the black and white world of COBOL, coding, and eventually found himself solving complex physics problems like computational fluid dynamics. He treats organizational growth like a physics problem, one where flow is everything. He is currently the CEO of inbanx, where he's applying that engineer rigor to help middle market companies scale their spend and banking without losing control. Rob, you've said that the person you are at the start of the business is completely different from the person you are at the exit. So in the spirit of that evolution, for someone who hasn't met the Chicago-born Texan yet, who is Rob? What is the why that gets you out of bed?
Oh God, that's a loaded question. No, I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me. Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head from COBOL to physics to banking. I don't know how I got here. I just kind of Forrest Gumped my way through. A serial founder, founded multiple businesses, scaled multiple businesses. Each business had its own personality, own challenges. A lot of them, a lot of them were near death challenges that you have. I think, the media portrays founding a company and scaling it as a sexy thing. Meanwhile, the reality of it is, if you haven't had at least a half a dozen near death experiences with the business, you're probably not doing something right. So I started, as you mentioned, computer science guy. Started and founded a business that was doing some year 2000 conversion stuff, and did that and realized that there was an opportunity to do some services work, and built that services business. We just happened to be, a services business at the time that .com boom was happening. Got out of that before it imploded, and then went on and built a couple other businesses, and took a business global. And in doing that, took no outside capital, so maintained all of our just organic growth, supported that whole endeavor. And in doing that, I realized you had to gain pretty tight control around the spending, and you had to have pretty great visibility into it. And we couldn't find any tools that would do either one of those things. And so I know it's the cliche, like using spreadsheets, but that's what we did, right? We used spreadsheets to track and manage what the spending was against kind of the budgetary numbers that we had. And so, exited that business in 2017, and then kind of did some things and realized that I wanted to solve that problem. It was a very big problem. The market was the biggest market I'd ever been a part of. Payments market is larger than the GDP because there's multiple payments per product. And so it's a huge market. 23 trillion is an estimate that Credit Suisse did for the U.S. domestic market. So of that 23 trillion, we're going after 12 trillion of it. So pretty massive, a lot of white space, a lot of opportunity, a lot of old tech here. And that was really how inbanx was formed. It was based out of an experience I had, and looking at a problem that I really wanted to solve, and really thought that there was a value to solving.
That's really cool. I appreciate you giving a very quick Cliff Notes version of sort of your history there.
Yeah.
I'd like to pick out one piece that you mentioned, especially going from your systems thinking developed early from the early days of coding. I'm curious. You mentioned in our conversation the other day that you look at an organization like a watch. There's different moving parts commuting in one big system. So I'm really curious, how did that kind of systems thinking develop from your coding days into taking an engineering business global without outside capital? Because that's quite an
Yeah.
impressive feat.
Yeah. It's funny. When you're asked a question like that, you start to look back and think, I wonder where that really happens. Like, at what point did that organizational view kind of happen? And I think, yeah, I was brought up around a lot of entrepreneurs. My grandfather was a German immigrant. Engineering was his thing. Like, so I think your community and your family that surrounds you oftentimes impacts how you go about approaching problems and how you see the world and how you solve problems in the world. And so I always liked to look at things in kind of the macro way, if you will. So an engine, how does it work? And then you have components to that engine. How do each of those components feed into the larger piece of it? And I use the watch analogy because it's very true with the business. You might have a marketing arm, you might have a sales arm, you might have a bunch of different components to that business, and all of those components have interworkings to them, and they all work together to achieve a common goal, whatever that goal is set on. But oftentimes problems arise in different areas of the business, and you're focused on, okay, I need to figure out a solution for that particular problem in that particular business. And in order to do that, you have to understand how that particular group or subset of group is operating. And so that's kind of how I've always come at things, in terms of looking at the world and trying to figure out things. It gives you, if you can understand it in a mechanical way, you can understand how to fix it in a very practical way.
That's really cool. Can you share an example of where that really helped in that scaling piece? Just make it a little real for us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, um, so looking well, and even, we'll use this business because this one was
Yeah.
relevant piece. We early on had a sponsor bank that we outgrew pretty rapidly. Within 3 months, we outgrew this our old sponsor bank, and when we did that, nobody tells you you've outgrown your relationship with that bank, right? Nobody gets on the phone and says, hey, by the way, we think you've outgrown the relationship. What ends up happening is you get a bunch of problems that indicate there's a problem with the relationship. And so you've got to really kind of sort it out and figure out, why is that problem there? And then how can I create a solution for that problem? And so in that case, we realized pretty quickly, well, they're holding up onboarding, things are slowing down. That's weird, right? And in doing that, you can try to move the bank, which we did. I tried to work with them, tried to communicate at different levels of that bank, and it kind of was going nowhere. And I thought, okay, well, what we really need to do is we really need to diversify our sponsorship for banking. And so we did that. And when you do that, and when you kind of diversify, well, now there's tactical things you got to accomplish to get to the next step. And so establishing those tactical requirements and how to tactically go address something of that nature, you have to have an understanding of what it's going to break and what it's not going to break. And so that's a good example of a lot of significant pressure put on the business. You have to understand how the business operates and what's moving in the business, and what's going to break and what's not going to break, and then how to fix it. And so that was probably the most relevant example I have of the immediate history
Yeah.
of the business. But I'm sure there's, I mean, on a day-to-day basis, there's countless others of the, other challenges around that.
Yeah.
And, I think I heard somebody say once that, you know, the founders only get the really hard problems. And that's true, right? And that's the way it should be, because you should, you're surrounding yourself with people that are very smart people. Um, and those people can handle, and they're very competent. They can handle very complex problems. So if they get a problem that they can't handle, it usually bubbles its way up to you, and you got to figure out a way to handle it. So that's the part of being the CEO and being a founder that I love. It's the challenge of how do you solve a complex problem in a very simplistic way.
Yeah, and I see how that really ties into how you were sharing that, if a founder doesn't have like a near death experience almost on a daily basis, something's not right, right? And
Yeah.
the way you structure it makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, really, I'm curious about how you navigate that, because that's a lot of pressure on the founder. It's a lot of fun. It's almost like a high risk, high reward sort of piece to this. How do you balance that?
Yeah. I've heard it said that we're all crazy. So, I think there's a component of that is right. Like, I've over the years, I've learned how to mentally trick myself, like how to mentally trick myself um, into action and into let's call it blind optimism, but optimism in a world where there's not too much to be optimistic about, right? You have a million things, a million problems, and you have to somehow look at those problems and say, this one's the most important, this one's the second most important, this one's the third, and so on. And so I think, for me, I love the challenge of it. I love the opportunity to be here. I mean, I tell my team, like, we've worked our butt off to get to a situation to where we can have pressure put on us. Like, we've worked to get here. This is the reward of working our butt off to get here, is that we get to have pressure, right? And pressure is a privilege. It really is. And so, I look at that as an opportunity to not only solve a problem, to learn more about myself, to grow, and to really understand things at a different level. Chances are, every hard problem that we've ever had, we've gotten through it. On the backside of it, we look back at it and think, "Wow, I learned a lot from that problem," right? And and so what really keeps me going in these issues and challenges is the opportunity for self-growth, the opportunity for learning. And it never hurts when you get around a bunch of CEOs or founders. They all love to share their struggles and sagas with each other. So it doesn't matter how big you are. It doesn't matter who you are. I'm sure you sit down with Elon, and he's probably got a million stories of the struggle and how things weren't working out, and one thing changed it all. I mean, almost every founder and business leader has that same story. I would assume even you with
Yeah.
your business.
Yeah, no, I'm really moved by what you said. I think it's pretty profound. Pressure is a privilege, and in that framing, what I really hear how you show up to it is well, what how can you make the most of that situation? And it almost sounds like for you, it's like, how do I learn from this, and how do I grow from this? Because when you take it that way, then the problem isn't really a roadblock, or is just something you got to do to level up, so to speak, and then you go on to the
Yeah.
next iteration of dealing with a bigger problem, higher impact, whatever it may be. That's really
Yeah. It also limits the amount of right and wrong, right? That's, I think, you can get paralysis if you look at the world as there's a right decision and there's a wrong decision. I don't see the world in right and wrong. I see the world in flavors of gray, right? So every decision has positives and negatives, and you're going to learn. Take path A, take path B, take path C. Either way, any three of those paths, you're going to learn. So you got to look at everything in probabilities and probability of outcomes.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's a combination of taking each of those paths, viewing it for what it is, which is a data point, applying your
Mhm.
intuition because you've got a wealth of experience of what it means to be a startup founder or an entrepreneur, to then finesse that logic of, okay, I got to trust my gut with this path versus this path, and you sort of just iterate and iterate.
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes sometimes your gut can lead you in the wrong path, right? Especially if you've done something the same way and it's worked and it's worked and it's worked, and you try to apply that in a different setting and it doesn't work. And so I think there is a level of experience that you have to rely upon. But I think more important than the experience is the data that you're getting told, right? And so that, I think, is more important than or can override sometimes your instinct or your gut feeling of where you should go. And so that's how I try to kind of, look at the world, data points, and follow the data. And then, does it align with my intuition and my experience, or does it not? And if it doesn't, look a little deeper and say, well, I wonder why, right? Or is there a contributing factor as to why? But you know, you take a different path, and you're going to get a different understanding of something. And so, I've seen a lot of founders and a lot of leaders that look at the world in black and white, yeah, right and wrong on a decision, and get themselves into trouble, right? Because they do something thinking it's the right thing, turns out to be challenging. They look back at it and say, I should have taken the other way, and then they're living in the past, not in the future. And so I
Mm.
think it's key to keep going and keep looking ahead at the future rather than second guessing choices you've made in the past.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're replacing that second guessing with a bias for action. If you're too busy caught up in action, you're not really going to give your space to ruminate and
Yeah,
keep yourself in that mindset of being present. Okay, this is the data. What do I do without bringing that whole baggage of, what if that, shoulda, woulda, coulda, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Which can bog you down, and I see it bog down a lot of people, right?
yeah,
And when we hit the snafu with our bank, um, and we found the new bank, and we're moving over to the new bank, that's a perfect example of where you could have sat in your old bank relationship and said, oh man, we should have known, we should have. Now, I'm not saying don't look back and don't look at key indicators that might have told you a different story. Definitely do that. But to sit in it and ruminate in it and not move because of it is death. So don't do
yeah.
that. Yeah.
So, combining some of the few things that you've shared about learning and then recognizing where um, these are their data points and how you sort of take them forward, I'm curious. You mentioned earlier you took a company global as part of scaling it.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what's the most common technical or even cultural legacy mistakes you see founders make when they try to push through that growth ceiling?
Yeah, and there's there's a very kind of interesting perspective I have here, because I certainly had my experience. I also have a lot of people around me that have global companies. A good friend founded a company out of San Francisco. It's now public. They're global. They're huge. It's over $1 billion in revenues each year. And so, what I find interesting about that is we talk about our experiences, like what the story we went through, right, or what we actually went through, and we kind of share those stories, and then we talk about it and the differences. And I think you have to walk into a situation of scale, or a situation in which you're mandated to scale, with a humble mindset. Like, you don't know everything. And certainly, if I were to scale into, let's say I scaled to Europe today, that's a very different world than 10 years ago. So I can come at it with some of the similar preconceptions, but ultimately what you have to rely on is the feedback of today, and then make your decisions based upon the current environment, right? And so I think, you can certainly have that experience built up and have that understanding sitting behind your decisions. But ultimately, like for me at least, I always worry that those previous experience are going to lead me down the wrong path or prevent me from seeing a blind spot somewhere, right? Because I had it one way. So I think the best advice or the best comment I could have around that is always keep your eyes open, always use data points, understand the current environments as best you can with as many data points as you can to give you the most informed feedback you can, and then take small actions and see how those small actions feed back to you. Because ultimately that's what we've did. And I've heard it said once that if your goals don't require faith, then your goals aren't big enough. I'm like, that's actually a great thing, because you can have a goal to go global and think, I got to do all these things beforehand. I got to figure this out. I got to figure this out. Maybe going global isn't the thing. Maybe we do this instead. And for me, it was kind of like a challenge I wanted to go after. So going global, I want to do it. Like I'm going to do it, right? And then everything else you just kind of figure out along the way, and you have faith that you can figure it out. And if you don't, you'll find a way, type of thing. And so that, I think, is the mindset that you have to have when you do these things. Is you have to be subservient to the goal and have faith in yourself that you're going to make it through all that stuff, and have faith that you're going to be in the right spot at the right time when you need to be, or you're going to manufacture the luck you need. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm almost hearing that you got to have like that delusional optimism or the blind optimism.
Yeah.
You gotta combine it with the humility of, you're not going to know everything. So you're going to have to, in classical consulting lingo, build a plane while you're flying it. And then see where it lands, which just sounds like a classical entrepreneur adventure.
And it's kind of like, these old timers, you get a lot of old timers down here that talk about them doing things, whether it's be, cattle ranches or whatever. And they always say, the older I get, the less I know. And, I can relate to that now, right? In your 20s, everything seems so simple. And so in a lot of ways, you can see very clearly how to get to someplace. And then the more experience you get and the more paths you take, you realize, oh man, that's really not so simple. Simple things are not simple at all. And actually, if they are simple and somebody's made them simple, that's a genius, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Speaking of simplifying things, I'd like to pivot a little bit into the world of inbanx. You solve flow problems in labs, growth problems for global markets. Now you're solving the fundamental capital flow that prevents mid-market companies from reaching their full potentials. I'm curious, can you share a little bit about the mission and the vision that you're after?
Yeah, so we saw an opportunity, I saw an opportunity in the market to solve complex problems for complex businesses in a simple way. And that's what we've set out to do. So it happens to be around spending. It happens to be a fintech company. It happens to be a budget first infrastructure. Like there's a lot of things that were common sense features that needed to happen to achieve that goal. But we saw this opportunity in the market to provide an infrastructure that gives businesses the visibility they need into spend and the control that they need into that spend. And so we did it in a very different way. We took an outside, I call it an outsider's approach, because here I am, a computer science guy building a financial company. And I did that through experience, but also through understanding the things that I needed, and then talking to a whole bunch of people and realizing the things I needed were the same things those people needed. That just, in different applications, but transparency was something that everybody needs. Control is something that everybody needs. A way to create financial responsibility with, throughout the organization is something that everybody needs. And how do you do that? and that's what we set out to do. And so, our infrastructure solves for that efficiently. We've deployed machine learning, deep intelligence, AI to solve the data flow problem. I'm going to call it a data flow problem because I view it as a true flow problem. From the second an employee swipes a card to the second you see that data in our system, that is what that lag is really what we're looking at reducing and making it as instantaneous as possible. And so that's what we've deployed, an infrastructure that helps businesses get a grasp of that and control it. And so ultimately, the reason why we're doing that is because it helps the business make better strategic decisions. And we've also, over the years, been around for 4 years now, well, 5 years actually, we've seen what's happened to the finance function. The finance function, back in the day was, hey, I'm going to do a bunch of reports, show you where the numbers are, and you're going to look at it and say, okay, that's where we are, and here's where we're going. The finance function now is what I call this adaptive finance era, where finance is responsible for getting real-time data in, making real-time strategic decisions, telling leadership if it's economically feasible to accomplish those goals, and what is the economic impact if they do accomplish those goals. And so it's a very different world that we see in the finance, in the finance function as compared to, early 2000s or even 10 years ago. And so yeah, it's been a pleasure to be in this industry as it's changed so much.
Yeah.
So that part is fascinating to me.
I was going to say, I think finance is one of those industries that, like you said, has had to evolve with the advent of tech and AI and whatnot, given how rooted it is in almost the systems or processes, right? Money in, money out. I'm oversimplifying, but there's a lot of transactions that happen in the middle. There's grayness that comes through that now with the speed of what we have today, it's about how do we surface them up quick enough, fast enough to then allow strategy to really come through, almost empowering the team, the company, whatever it may be, to elevate almost. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, it's fascinating to me. The pandemic has happened, but you look at like Peloton, for example. They went from massive growth in the pandemic to everybody going back to work and massive decline. And so you saw their business model shift drastically when they had the massive growth, and then the massive decline. You saw finance right at the tip of that spear. Like, finance drove that company to profitability based upon a pivot. And the pivot was worked through with the leadership team, but finance was sitting right at the table. Whereas, finance 20 years ago would have been there to tell the bad story. They wouldn't have been there to actually help create a solution. But finance is now required to be part of the strategic solution. And that, I think, is that's fascinating to me. I mean, it's the evolution of finance in a way that is far more pliable and adaptive than it ever has been. And I think the future, with different learning capacities from AI, different training techniques on the infrastructure and on the intelligence piece of it, is going to continue to evolve and continue to grow. And that's what we're really leaning into here is our intelligence core, and it's less about LLMs and speaking to a system, and more about a system being smart and intelligent and taking action on behalf of the training or the observations that it has.
Yeah, and so help me understand, help the audience understand a little bit. How does inbanx then fit in with? You mentioned sponsor banks. How come there's that relationship? What's behind that?
Yeah, so in the world that we're in, with fintechs don't have, well, some do, they buy a charter, but you have a banking infrastructure that is, you can think of it as your architecture, if you will. It's your financial architecture to be able to move money or move credit. And so every fintech on the planet that does anything with money or credit has what they call a sponsor bank. And that sponsor bank is actually sponsoring you to operate on behalf of it. And so you're an extension of that bank. You're beholden to the regulations of that bank and the regulators of that bank. And so I know we've seen some bad stewards of that in the last few years, and some people that were running fast and loose on the tech side that got into some trouble because they were running fast and loose. And so it's it's a highly regulated environment, which is frustrating and great all at the same time. And then it's I'll call it stable environment to kind of operate from, but you have to figure out how to be innovative on top of that stable base. And that's the piece where I think, the challenge comes in for lots of fintechs. It's not as easy to pivot. Sometimes it's not as easy to implement things because there is a more of a rigor on the technology. But oddly enough, engineering and banking are very similar in how they implement features, right? Or techniques, I should say, right? The scientific method, engineering, peer review, you go through a whole bunch of vetting and testing and to ensure that a feature is right. Banking, same thing. You have to test it, you have to vet it, you have to maintain it, you have to ensure that it's operating in the way that policy states. And so those worlds are oddly very similar.
Yeah, I was actually, so the reason why I brought that up was because, like you rightfully mentioned, banks stable, and therefore almost risk averse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Fintech nowadays, or entrepreneurial fintechs, I wouldn't say less risk averse, but innovative, and that creates a very interesting tension between the banks and as they go through
Yeah.
this. So I'm curious, and then you compound that with the economic climate we're in. Scrappiness is almost a requirement to be able to figure things out. So how do you maintain that progress, that growth that you have while building the operational robustness, if you will, and the consistency that's required by banking partners?
Yeah, and I think the first and foremost, the relationship you have with your bank. Like our relationship with our sponsor, the new sponsor bank we have is a personal relationship, right? Like I've gone out there, I've met the CEO, I've sat down with him, we've had dinner, we've talked. Same thing for everybody that is on the team that supports us. We know these people there. There's a personal relationship. That was a direct fix, or that was a direct relation to what I didn't have at the first experience. I didn't have a direct, personal relationship with the folks. It was like I never actually met the president of the bank. I knew the executive chairman of the board, and he and I sat down and talked quite a bit. But I never actually met anybody that was on the implementation team because that's how they operated. When I looked for my new sponsor bank, or the upgraded sponsor bank, I wanted to make sure that we had a personal relationship. We did have, a setting where we could sit down and talk. And I think that changes everything, right? For you. It helps to have an understanding of the bank's goals. The bank we have now is publicly traded. The bank we had before was private. Differences in how they operate. They both were state regulated, which is what we chose and what we wanted. So that comes with a little bit of complexity, but also there's an opportunity there. Our new bank is in Utah. The old bank was in Oregon. So regulations are vastly different. The way they operate is vastly different. So I think, having that personal relationship, understanding the goals of the bank that you're working with, like what's important to them. I know that sounds pretty rudimentary, but it changes. Some banks, back in the day wanted deposits, then they wanted, then they had too much money, they needed lending, and so they're evolving. But understanding their struggle and understanding what their goals are will help the fintech to align to those goals, or at least present their technology in a way that aligns with the goals of the bank. And that, I think, is where the biggest challenge is, but also where the biggest opportunity is when you get it right.
It almost sounds like storytelling is critical here
Oh
because you're
God,
able
yeah,
to take that narrative and make it relevant for them, right? And
yeah.
so what for them?
And you gotta realize too, like I my props to bankers. They are professional businessmen. Like they've been doing this for, some of them generations, right? It's their dad's dad started this thing up. Grandpa did. Their dad ran it. They ran it, and so they are professional businessmen. Um, and so you have tech that kind of can be flighty, can fly all over the place and pivot and move. And you're trying to blend that world with a very stable, very consistent world.
Mm.
And that I think is sometimes the biggest challenges that tech has when dealing with banks.
Can you share a little bit more about that? I'm thinking more specifically. I mean, you've already mentioned a little bit about how you outgrew a relationship with the banks. You're moving on to the next. So what I'm really hearing is there's growth under your wings here. How do you handle that, or where do you see that tension come to play, where you've got a larger bank, if you will, that's maintaining their approach or their alignment, their vision, whilst balancing your own scaling timeline? Naturally, tech companies have a slightly more aggressive scaling timeline than theirs. So how does that work for you?
Yeah. Well, you have to look at what the appetite of the bank is. So in our world, it's volume, right? It's credit. It's volume, and so you have to look at the appetite of what that bank has on its plate, and then look at where your appetite is or where your goals are set at, and that gap is a problem, right? That's a problem you need to find a solution for. And so with our first bank, we outgrew that relationship in the first 3 months of launching the product. We had brought in too much business, right? And you would think that's a great problem to have. No, that's not a great. That's a terrible. Don't ever do that problem. That's a hard problem. But that was the issue, right? And so you've got a spot in the market. I see a spot in the market. I see an opportunity in the market. I know how to build a tech to go after that, and I do it. And then all of a sudden, it's like too much comes in too fast, and the bank's like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! We got to stop!" Right? And so you with the new bank, obviously they're a far bigger bank, more capacity, more ability to support a growth client like us on it. Um, but there are still gaps there, right? There are still gaps to that relationship, and so what you have to do, what I had to do, is figure out, okay, what's a practical solution to that gap, and then what's a cost-effective solution to that gap? Because there's always a solution that you want that is way outside of your means, and you kind of got to figure out, like, okay, I'll get there, but how do I solve for the next 8 months, right, to get to this one that might be a year and a half, 2 years later. You've seen it with Square bought a charter, but early on they couldn't afford to buy a charter, so they had to figure out how to work with the bank until they got to the point where they could buy a charter.
Yeah.
um, but it's similar to us, right? There's things you have to do and you have to figure out, and you have to be practical and realistic about what those solutions are and how long those solutions will last too.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's it not enough weight is put onto this, but you got to keep a pulse on what's there and what's coming, so that way you're almost anticipating how you got to pivot or what's next for you as you solve that problem on hand. Much like you said, we can get a charter, but that's a long way ahead. We got to figure out the now problem to help us with the tomorrow problem.
Yeah, and it's oftentimes, I mean, in my world, it's oftentimes, do we build it or do we buy it? Do we build it? Do we buy it? I mean, that's kind of a consistent, common thing for us. What I will say is, in a lot of ways, AI has changed that world for us. I mean, we have a small team. We punch way above our weight in terms of what we're able to accomplish. But every single one of our developers adopted a AI co-pilot that creates code, and so we're now, like, our throughput has increased drastically just because we're leveraging AI. Now, I will say that that creates problems too, because garbage in, garbage out, and there's more to check. I mean, something that would take a normal programmer 200 lines, maybe AI spits out in 5,000 lines. So you've got to weigh the pluses and minuses there. But the productivity level of one developer is now getting exponentially more efficient with the use of AI tools to help them.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to change everything for a lot of tech companies. A good example of that, and I share this because it's kind of like one of those key points that you're like, okay, I know I'm on the right track. But we we went up against Brex and a bunch of different clients, and we beat them, based upon our technology. Now, fast forward a couple years later, and Brex just recently sold to Capital One for $5 billion. They just sold their tech for $5 billion, and I know I can beat it. Like, that to me gets me up at 4:30 in the morning. Like, I'm going to go, right? So that's a motivator to me. As hard as my day is, like, I know that I beat them, and I know that they sold their tech for five billion. So that to me is just like a huge motivator. And so you gotta look at those things and figure out, like, a how do you get scrappy? How do you win? But also, when you do get the wins, like, how does that motivate you as a person? And how does that motivate the team?
Yeah, that's really cool. I really appreciate you taking the time to share how you're using AI to be able to, impact your own throughput. And I'm sure, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't hear of Modbot or Claude, or whatever the next iteration is going to be. Like, the scale of iterations is exponential within the world of AI and tech. So I'm only curious that when we sit back together, if we get back, let's say 3 months from now, 6 months from now, what does that definition of throughput look? And that's going to be fundamentally very, very different. And that's what's impacting the tech space. Just to
Yeah.
flip on this a little bit, you started to mention that you outgrew your current bank. So I'm curious on the customer acquisition process. What does that look like? What are your goals for the next 6 to 12 months? What does growth look like for inbanks on the front end?
Yeah, it's so again, I think for the scalability kind of theme that we have here, like, there's always there's always an opportunity, right? And so we're coming out of a phase where it was founder led. Usually in venture backed high growth businesses, you raise a pre-seed round to kind of get a proof of concept. You'll raise a seed round to get market acceptance and product market fit, and then you raise a Series A round to get scale, maybe a B scale. Usually, a Series C or Series D is for a pivot into an adjacent market that you want to go into. But that's kind of how these capital raises happen. And so we, because of the bank slowdown and move, got delayed a little bit in that. So it went from founder-led sales to then founder-led sales, and then brought in some people that we had multiple different hats, and were able to assist in some of that sales activity, and then leverage partnerships with other firms and with other banks to kind of drive deal flow for us. And so my previous experience in engineering, we had a great relationship with Richard Childress's NASCAR team on the engine side, and helping them build better and faster cars. And I told them about what I was doing early on with inbanx, and they called me up and they said, "Could you help with this problem that we had around visibility and control?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so they've been a client of ours since the beginning. We then realized, hey, professional sports might be an opportunity for us. And so we have a lot of inroads into professional baseball teams, NFL teams, hockey. So there's a lot going on in that space. And also in logistics, in medical equipment, just tons of different areas. And so that's been a blessing to us, because the solution is multi-industry. Like, you can use it in any industry. It's also been a curse, because you get a lot of investment folks that are like, well, what are you really solving, and what is the industry that you're really solving it for? And so the answer is, The real problem is visibility and control. The industry type is, it doesn't matter, right? Because everybody's got the same problem, right?
Yeah. And so
So
you mentioned investment. Are you looking for setting yourself up for an investment round?
yeah, we're currently raising right now. I mean, I think as a smaller company that's VC backed, you're always raising, right? You're always raising money, and you're always poor, and you're always trying to figure out how to achieve something in the most economical way that you can. And so you're always kind of in that mode. Now I've heard people that have gotten to Series C and D and later and said, "Oh no, that gets easier." But my experience is that it hasn't. So is what
Yeah,
it is, I
I've
guess.
had a few conversations, and it's definitely a mixed bag. Some say it's
Yeah.
easier, others say it doesn't, and I think it just comes down to what did you do before, because some of them carry forward, some of them don't. And so you started to
Yeah.
make mention of getting inroads into the sports. I'm sorry to cut you off there. I was just
No.
curious. Did you ever see yourself playing at the intersect of sports and fintech? Because that just sounds so cool.
Yeah, kind of. Now that you mention it, I've never really. I've been so focused on the problems of industry that I never really looked back and said, "Wow, you're here."
Yeah.
Um, no, I mean it's fascinating to me. I mean, if you look at Richard's race team and the problems they have, it it makes sense. I mean, they have, you know, NASCAR is different than every other. I'll give people school people on racing, but NASCAR is different than every other F1 Indy because they actually manufacture their cars for each race, right? So they're a manufacturing business. Then they have to get three cars for every one race, right? They have to a backup car, and then they have to have the backup in parts of those other two cars in case something happens. So they have three cars that they're getting to these races. So they have to take those three cars, put them on a truck, and then logistics get them there, right? And then once you get in the car there, you have to get the driver there. You have to get the pit crew. You have to get all their tools there. So you got a whole fleet that kind of goes to the next race. Then you have an aviation company to fly everybody there. So you have all these different components, like a watch, right? You're looking at these components and how they all work to win a race. It's fascinating to me. But their biggest problem is people that are spending. They probably have like 80 people, that are going to each one of these races, from marketing folks, sales folks, operations folks, to the actual race team folks, right? That are running the race team, pit crew. And all of them have to spend to get to a win. And that, I think, for us is what I look for is, does the business's problem directly tie to revenue? If I don't have 50 sales reps in the field spending, are they going to generate the revenue they need to generate? And the answer is no, right? And so we have a logistics company, air logistics company. If their pilots aren't spending, they're not flying. And so that's a great one for us. Anywhere where spending is directly related to the revenue that the business generates is a great opportunity for us to shine, because we do simplify, we do streamline the work requirements, and we ultimately free the employees up to actually do what matters, do the work that they need to do, less on reporting what they're doing, and we have an automated system to do that for them.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you sharing that. And if I was to sort of summarize this, on the back end, you're working through figuring out a sponsored bank. On the front end, you've got many, many different inroads, and almost in parallel, you're also thinking about you're in the middle of a seed or raising funds at the moment, and so you've got a
Yeah.
lot going on in your world. Um, Last question here for you: where do you find the most bottlenecks in your current operation today? Or if I was to phrase it differently, if you had a magic wand to fix the one thing that's slowing you down in the world of inbanks, what would that be?
Sure. So we do have a sponsor bank. We have a great sponsor bank that we've found and we've launched with, and so we've been in market for about 6 months now with this new bank and the new program, if you will. You know, I, you say, what's the biggest bottleneck in our world, and for what we do? There's a component of the technology is never the problem, right? You can build tech. I will say that once you build the tech, and hence why VC-backed companies are scalable and why they're so valuable is because you build the tech early, you prove you built good tech, and then you move on to other environments and you deploy that tech inside of new environments and it works. So your development costs should decrease as your business scales and increases in value. So for us, the tech core, the intelligence core, everything we have is built, primed, ready to go. Yeah, there might be tweaks to it and things that we want to issue and features we want to deploy, but 90% of it is done. It's the same product that you would have at $1 billion of scale, right? So for us, the scale comes at volume credit. And so how do you get those crediting components to kind of go along with the customer base? And so that's really where we're using data to tell that story and to solve that problem. And I think that's the most practical approach to it. And so that's my opinion and my informed opinion, but that's what we're doing to help reduce that bottleneck. But that bottleneck of scale is very real. And it's why fintech is hard, right? It's because you have to build it in such a way that it is consistent with policy, procedures, and regulations. And then you have to make it flexible enough to allow innovation to happen. And that's really the challenge.
Yeah. I'm sure the other fintech folks that are listening into this can only relate to that very interesting yin and yang sort of pull to the space.
Yeah. It's you have in other industries, if you mess up, if you have a failure, system failure, if a feature doesn't work the way it's intended to do, what are the consequences of it? You might get a bad number out of it. If we were to get a bad number, that's a very bad day for everybody. So we absolutely cannot get a bad number. And so there's a bunch of different things that you have to do on the inside that make sure that you never get a bad number.
Yeah. And so as part of focusing almost inwards here, as you grow and scale, I'm also curious about how you keep your team motivated, because I mean it's a lot of pressure. You mentioned pressure is privilege, right? How do you get the key team to keep going?
I mean, I think I took a very different approach to this business. As my fifth one, we talked a lot about the culture component. So I looked at the business as an entity that was alive, and what do I want the characteristics to be, and what do I want this business to really be? And started with a culture component that I basically built it. As I'm thinking about this problem I want to solve, I'm thinking about what do I want the business to be, and how do I want that the business to operate. And so I built this culture framework that was all built around kind of a greatness mindset, right? Like how do you push yourself? Who do you surround yourself with? And I started to draw upon my personal experiences, right? Like if you want to go get tackle a huge goal, chances are you surround yourself with mentors that can help you tackle that huge goal. And employees and folks that you work with are the same thing. Like they're around you every day, operating with you. They're shaping you. They're asking you questions. You're building this with them. And so I took that culture and before I ever talked about what the position was, what the requirements were of the position, I showed them the deck and I said, here's what I believe in. This is what this business is all about. And it's about, open and honest communication. It's about respect of others. It's about pushing ourselves, like, telling each other where the gaps are when people can't see them. And so it's around this kind of culture of high performance. And so you inadvertently, what I've realized is you get people that self-select into that and then love being in it, right? Because it's like a challenge every day and it feeds their soul. And what I didn't expect to happen that did was, sure, you got the employees, but then we bring in advisors, right? And you're working with people on the outside. And a lot of those people that we have are professional sports guys, right? So they like this too. And I'm like, that makes complete sense because, my upbringing, I was supposed to be a soccer player and, my grandfather played professionally. And so I was brought up with that kind of mindset of you're always trying to perfect something. You're going to do it a million times until it's perfect. And you never get perfect, by the way. It's just you get a bunch of practice. That's all you get. But a lot of these professional sports players love that environment. And so I didn't realize that I was going to attract advisors to the business that were of that same mindset. And you can propagate that out to the board too. Like we have a great board of folks that have done amazing things. Like if I ever, when I started this business, I would have never fathomed that I had the people around me with the success that they've had around me. Like it would have been that was truly I never saw that coming. And so I attribute that to the culture too that we've been able to build. And the culture is not a slide deck. And I know I talked about it as a slide deck, but it's truly a thing that, you walk in, it's how you respond to people. It's how you operate. It's gotta be at your heart because some days when you're pressure, when you're tired, when when things aren't working out, you have to still adhere to that culture. And that's, I think, where a lot of people get in trouble is when they try to create a disingenuous culture and then stress pressure happens and they act different or they act counterculture. And then everybody that's in that business is like, this culture's totally non-congruent, right? Leadership doesn't act the way that they want us to act. And there's a friction point. And so, and that prevents scale. And so, I would say, there's a saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And I do believe that, like you have a good culture, you can accomplish anything.
I really appreciate you taking the time to share that because through my own experience, I think culture is one of those things that requires a lot of effort and intentional effort to be able to change and adapt it to something that we want it to be. And it almost sounds like for you, when it came to your fifth business here, you were very, very intentional to how you even wanted to set the tone. And from there, it's sort of been almost magnetic in that it's attracted those people, those that are self-selected, all the way from those that are to your team through to your mentors in the advisory or even the board member position. And that's pretty profound.
Yeah, it is. It is really profound. And I think, for me, the one thing that I think that I've seen, and you become aware of it over and over, is that our culture here has what someone calls psychological safety, right? The ability to give feedback without fear of getting fired or getting thrown away in a closet somewhere. Having open and honest opinion discussions without getting chastised or pushed down because of it. Because at the end of the day, iron sharpens iron, right? And so you got to have that feedback loop. And that feedback loop, like when you're sharpening iron with iron, there's sparks flying, there's things coming off the blade, right? It's not a pretty thing. It's not a soft thing. Sometimes it's a confrontational thing, but it's a mutual respect of who we are as people, but yet we're able to challenge each other. And I think, I'm sure you know this, you in your PhD thesis, right? You get hammered and you have to respond to that. But the reason why that hammering is happening is to make sure that you're founded in truth and you understand it as you should. And I think the same thing is true with culture. And that's, I think, the biggest problem with large organizations that try to push down culture with no feedback up. They don't want to hear everybody's response to it. They just want everybody to do it. That's a culture that prohibits scale. You need to be able to have a culture that feeds back up. You discuss problems openly. And, there have been times where I will secede by my opinion based upon a group's opinion. And I'll say, you know what, let's try that. Let's go that way. to see how it works out. Over now, there are some times when I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense. Like, we need to do it this way. But there are other times where I'm like, no, let's do it this way. Let's see what happens, because I could be wrong, right? And
Yeah.
so I think you got to have that, and you got to have the culture that supports that type of camaraderie and discussions.
Yeah, it's funny you made that comment around the corpus where they, it's almost one way. Um, I find that the maturity of handling conflicting opinions is a very rare asset when it comes to building teams and building up the culture. Or maybe not rare, maybe rare is the wrong word, but it's underappreciated. And it's
Yeah,
probably that I've often found that companies that do really, really well in that leadership perspective and then are almost infectious in how they influence their team and motivate their team, it comes down to how do you intentionally create the tension that brings out a solution that neither party on their own would ever surface up, because that's the solution that's going to really push the needle. But to get there, I really love the
yeah.
analogy you shared of iron on iron. There's going to be sparks that come around. It's going to get heated. There's going to be friction, but the product that comes out is what we're all after. Like that. That's what we're all committed to. It's not the nitty gritty in the between that we get caught up with.
Yeah, and it's not the when those sparks fly, it's not you still respect that person, and you're not coming at it from a totally disrespectful place. You're coming at it from a place of respect. And that, I think, I've heard it said, the most unloving thing that somebody can do is not tell you the truth.
Mm,
And I truly believe that. And I realize that I'm a person that is very kind of honest about things that I see, and truth. And I'm not hurt when somebody's honest back at me when it's contrary to what I believe in. But also, I also think that there has to be a mutual level of respect that has to take place in that setting. And we've managed to do that and walk that line, mainly because we're self-selecting into this pressure culture, culture of pushing each other. But at the end of the day, we're pushing each other because we want to see each other doing better. And so I think you see it with sports teams where they've able to find it and then they lose it, right? Or they get a draft pick and they end up losing it. It's kind of the same thing with business, right? You're doing the same thing. You have people coming in, coming out, and you're focused on the goals and the objectives. But I think the ability to have that feedback and honest feedback is what makes the business successful. And so you have to embrace it um, without degradation of a person's integrity. You keep respect, right? And I think that that's the way you do it. And so that's what we've managed to accomplish here.
yeah, I was just left with how, and it's interesting how it's full circle. I was just left with how I'd introduced you onto the show, as you said that you're a person that you are a different person at the start of a business that's completely different at the end of it. And this starts to really explain why. It's because there's like this growth mindset that's just applied throughout. And I bet that that statement would almost apply to everybody on your team as well.
Yeah, we don't, and I don't think of it as a growth mindset. I just think of it as who I am. All right,
Mm,
it's not like some artificial thing that I'm like, oh, I read a book, let's get a growth mindset and let's do it, and I'm going to go through these 5 bullet points. Um, I look at it as and maybe that's you're making me inside, making me discover things that I maybe didn't know before. But and maybe that's really where it's coming from. And the team does select into that. I mean, everybody is an expert at what they do here, and oftentimes when I come at a challenge or a problem with them, I'm coming at it from a way of or from an angle of here's the problem. Help me understand your world, right? You're an expert. You tell me, like, here's the problem. Why is that showing up? Or what do you believe would be the best approach to fixing this problem? Or what do you think is happening, right? So it's always this kind of give me your perception first before I make a blanket, mandate or blanket push for some decision. It's help me to understand where this thing's coming from and what you see from your perspective, and then let's go and accomplish the task together and see what happens. And that's really where the see what happens piece is kind of, I think, where the magic happens, because you get people that are like, different opinions to how things are going to work out, and people that see one thing very firmly one way, other people that maybe see it firmly another way. And oftentimes those two conflicting viewpoints can paralyze you from moving. But in our setting, it's, hey, let's take this approach, let's take this path, and let's see what happens. And then we'll come back and revisit feedback loops, right? We'll use the feedback loop and we'll see what happens. If we need to alter path, we will. And chances are, you kind of weave through these challenges, and everybody grows behind that because they were part of creating it. And that, I think, is the beauty of having great culture. And that culture scales, right? The culture of repressive and repressor, and repressed doesn't work. That's maybe an old business model that I think has been somewhat flushed out, but maybe still exists in some large companies, been around for a long while.
Yeah. Rob, this has been a lovely conversation. I really appreciate the physics and the engineering behind all of the different adventures, and I can really see how to bring it back home to the foundations of that. You've shown us that scaling just isn't about more. It's about really building a framework, building a system, be it culture, be it capital flow, be it everything in between. It's really fascinating to see how systems really come into play. And it's also about how you have, like you said at the end, you got to see where it goes. Let the magic happen as well. Before
Yeah.
we wrap up, I want to give you the floor. For the founders that are hitting their own scaling wall, or those that are looking for more efficient ways to manage and balance risk, what's the best way for them to connect with you and Inbanks?
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I think you'll probably connect to me via this share. I mean, I love to talk to people. So, anybody that wants to reach out and have a conversation, I'm open to it. I would say, I built this company, I founded this company, and a company that was addressing the same problem in 2020. Spent a year, had to kill that company, reform a company in 2021, and then run at it. And in doing that, it was a time period when money was flowing. Venture capital was just like issuing out loads of money, and I can remember looking at all the news around me and saying, God, everybody has it so easy. They're getting all this money, and we're really, it's hard for us. And looking back, I realized that it was easy for nobody. And oftentimes, the companies that got large checks ended up going out of business because they couldn't do what they said that they were going to do with the money that they took. And so it put them in a bad position. And so what I realized there was that faith was a huge thing.
Hmm.
Like faith, you're on the right path. Faith, you're exactly where you're at, where you're at exactly the right point, exactly the right time. Um, that's what you have to believe, because that's what gets you through, and that's the truth of it. So to those founders that are struggling and seeing the brick wall in front of them, I'd say, faith, that brick wall is going to go away, but also I've been there. I know exactly what that feels like. And for the others that maybe aren't seeing the brick wall and things are going good, faith, you're going to achieve your goals, and also that the problems that do crop up, that you're able to address them. And so it's never easy. It's never easy. And if it was, everybody'd be doing it. So keep doing it. You know,
I
pushing
appreciate
yourself.
that. I really appreciate that, Rob. That brings us
Yeah.
to the end of this episode. This podcast is sponsored by Algo AI Partners. We help fintech services companies scale using smart AI solutions. If you want to book a free consultation to find out more, just click the link in the show description.